on.
Hi, I'm Sarah Light with UC Cooperative Extension, and I'm here with Liz Harper. Our guest today is Tom Johnson from Kamprath Seed. Tom, thanks so much for joining us today. Can you please introduce yourself for our audience?
Well, thank you for the invite. So my name's Tom Johnson. I'm the agronomist for Kamprath Seed Company. I'm a native Californian, raised on a diversified ag operation near Fresno. We had hay, grapes, and cows, so I had lots of fun there. I went to CSU Fresno and majored in crop production and plant physiology, and learned about other crops like cotton and tree crops. Started my career with Spreckle Sugar in Mendota, and then I put in some time with a farming company before I started with Kamprath about 23 years ago. At Kamprath, my primary job is, I call it product development, in that I'm looking at new varieties or new plants for cover cropping or the other markets that we work in. Kamprath Seed's a wholesale seed company based in Manteca. It's been here almost 50 years. We do cover crop, range, pasture, a little bit of turf, a little bit of native grasses, some wildflowers, kind of all those other things that people might need once in a while. I've been interested in cover cropping, not necessarily realizing it was soil health, probably for 40 or 50 years.
That's great. Thanks so much. And you're one of the first industry representatives that we've had the opportunity to interview. So as the agronomist with Kamprath Seed, what perspective from the industry can you share with our audience about cover cropping in California?
Well, number one, cover cropping in California is different than Iowa. Our climate's different, our soils are different, our crops and cropping patterns are different. With that in mind, when you go researching about cover crops, apply some local reality to your decisions, because just because the internet says it's great doesn't mean it'll work here. And second, a cover crop is a biological input, so it's not going to produce an instant fix, and it's not going to do the same thing year after year. And that's probably one of the most frustrating things for most people that are getting into it, starting with it. And the desired results take time to accumulate. There's usually no instant gratification, and it's not easy to get a return on investment calculation out of it. What we get is real hard to measure in dollars and cents, but makes a big difference overall.
So Tom, you've been working with growers throughout California. And so in your experience, how has the landscape of cover crops changed, and soil health changed in California over 25 years?
When I first started, cover cropping was just going out of vogue again, at least amongst the people that adopted it. In the last 5 or 6 years, it's becoming more mainstream. It's more accepted by regular growers. Individual growers and farming operators that wouldn't hear using a cover crop are kind of asking about it. They're watching what's going on. They're sticking their toe in the water and trying it a little bit. Organic producers long ago realized they had to keep that soil happy, or they were going to go out of business. But, you know, besides, oh, God damn, I lost my place. Excuse my language.
Mm-hmm.
But now the conventional growers are kind of seeing that keep that soil happy has benefits as well. Besides some of the other things you get, like weed control or water infiltration or being able to drive on it, it shows that they're doing it, they're stewarding the land, they're being a stewardship. And that can help them sell not only their crop, but the industry itself. And that's, you know, that's kind of something we have to do in that. I think part of why cover cropping is getting more mainstream is kind of the changing of the guard. We're having an influence of younger managers and growers out there on the farming operations. They're taking over for dad, or the old managers retiring or whatever. And they were notified about cover crops, and they're looking at it, and they're also going, the way dad did it isn't going to work. Mm-hmm. Between input costs, regulations, and what that consumer wants at the end, they're going to have to change. So the funny thing is with a few tweaks, we're doing the same thing that grandpa or great-grandpa used to do.
I was going to say that.
I have to remind people, prior to World War II, fertilizer was grown or thrown out on the ground after you got done with the cows. It didn't come in a bag. It didn't come in a barrel. So population change, we have more people to feed, we have to do it better, but on the other hand, we're doing some of the same things that Grandpa had to.
Mm-hmm.
The soil health, biggest change in the ag production industry is just realizing that there's something that needs to be healthy. That we need to go beyond putting enough nutrients on to produce a crop. Soil health is a catchy phrase and it fits. I've watched half a dozen phrases go by that kind of bounced off. It's probably the best way to describe the realization that soil is more than just small rocks, water, and air.
No.
There's a whole biome, is what they call it, that makes it work, or as I call them, the tiny livestock. And as we get better and better at seeing this stuff and being able to measure what it does and measure how many there are, more we realize how vital that soil biology, all those tiny livestock are to life. Okay.
So another kind of statewide question, you've sold a lot of cover crop throughout the state of California. So what has been your most popular species? And then have you seen popularity by region? So is there a regional species? And if so, why would that be?
Probably the most used cover crop material in California is plain old common barley.
Common barley. Cool.
We don't necessarily sell as much as some other people do, but it's cheap, reliable, and it's easy to manage. I mean, it's used on the thousands of acres in the vineyards in the Central Valley and the Central Coast, the Southern Coast. We'd like to sell them something more expensive that might provide more benefits to their crops in the soil. But a cover crop that slows and controls erosion, adds some carbon to the soil, sequestrates nitrates that are leaching, and provides some roots for our tiny livestock, better than none. When the price of grapes tanked, I think about 2002, a lot of guys went back to barley because they could plant it for about 30 bucks an acre versus 75 bucks an acre for seed. So that's kind of where what a lot of that drives. Another common one used all over the state's mustard. In my opinion, they're a double-edged sword. The benefits outweigh the potential problems, but there are some potential problems. And there's so many things you can do with those as a cover crop, whether it's sucking up stuff or you're going to biofumigate with it or whatever. I mean, we could spend an hour talking about that. It's probably still not answer.
Hello, everyone.
Cover all the stuff. So, and then the most common by area, it does change. I mean, you go up to the North Coast and where it rains a lot, barley doesn't like that much water. So that's not where it's most popular. And I'm a proponent of using what works. I want you to be successful at that because then you'll come back and buy more, or you'll word of mouth says you'll do more. And so so I'm going to recommend what works in that area that I know works in that area, rather than whatever you may say or whatever. And the region, the climate, the crop all play an important role in how I'm going to prescribe what I'm going to say is going to work. That's kind of what I feel. I haven't seen a tremendous shift in species or types of mixes or whatever over time. It's just kind of steadily getting more and more. We're moving more and more seed as more and more people have to basically are forced to or take up cover cropping.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And yeah, anything in the ground. I liked that comment that you made, that anything in the ground serves a function and that they're pretty powerful functions. So the final question I have for you is, when you are talking with growers, what is the most common management question for cover crops that you receive?
The most common question is, what should I plant? That always launches this game of 20 questions. I want to make a recommendation or give the guy a couple options of what I think is going to work the best for where he's at, what he wants to accomplish. So then I got to find out, okay, where are you at? What are you growing? Is it irrigated, not irrigated? What's the soil type? All those fun things go into this decision tree that kind of spits a recommendation out the far side. That's the most common question. Probably, to go down the rabbit hole a little bit, the most difficult question to answer is, when can I kill it? When should I kill it? This isn't such an issue in vineyards as it is in trees, but it is something that we get all the time, especially in the spring as we're out wandering around looking at them, and these guys are going, oh my God, it's getting big and whatever. And the infuriating answer I always have to give them is, well, it all depends. Termination timing depends on what goal you're using that cover crop for. Weed suppression, maximum nitrogen fixation, increasing organic matter, you're going to have to let it get as big and bushy as it's going to get the best bang for the whole thing, grow to its maximum potential. Getting an annual clover mix or an insectary blend to flower and make seed, and so it'll come back next year so you don't have to plant it all the time, means that plants are going to have to fully mature and dry up and drop seed back down on the ground. And both of those usually means it's going to get kind of funky looking. And every farmer has one farmer at least that's looking over his shoulder and poking him in the ribs and going, why are you growing weeds in your field like that? So what we have to do a lot of times is we have to remember that it's a tool. And if it's interfering with what you're doing, or it's not doing what you want it to do, it's time to terminate it. It's time to start over again, or reassess what went on, and okay, we'll take this out and start over. And the reality sets in. You got pruning and spraying, other winter and spring operations that a standing cover crop can interfere with. Some of that you can mitigate by planting every other middle, sometimes and sometimes that cover crop's just in the way. It's got to come down. And I call this their tolerance to residue. Some growers have more tolerance than others. In almonds, it's a real big bugaboo. 9 times out of 10, we can make it such that the residue's gone down enough they can harvest easy enough. They don't have what they call a haystack they got to get the nuts out of. But they don't think it'll go away. So they're kind of like, So first timers usually will err on the side of cutting it a little early. But no 2 seasons are the same. So the next year, the guy goes out and plants the same thing. And on the 15th of March, when he mowed it last year and it was 2 feet tall, this year it's only a foot tall. If he's married to the calendar, then he starts mowing. If he's willing to let it go and get as big as it did last year, then he's got some more thing to do. And again, if he mows it early and he mows it short, or doesn't maximize it, it's still, every little bit helps. Because what we're doing is we're trying to heal our soil. We've been beating them up for 100 years or better. I mean, you might get a better boost if you let it go for a couple of weeks, but on the other hand, the guy says, I got to kill it, or I got 5,000 acres to cover in one mower, so he's going to start mowing. So that's kind of my take on that questions. But like I said, anytime we go out and in the season, there'll be a different set of questions, but it usually starts with, what do I plant? And then it ends with, when can I kill it?
Right. Yeah. Well, Tom, thank you so much. I've really appreciated and enjoyed everything you've shared today. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we end our interview?
Just a couple of points. There's so many points that we can cover that it's probably not worth it, but a couple that really need to be drove home is to reap the maximum benefit for your soil and your soil biology and your soil structure and everything else out of using cover crops is you have to keep using them. It's not a one-time fixes it, and you don't have to do it ever again. You can skip a year, but maybe you need to figure, okay, I need to have that in that rotation. It's got to come back around every couple of years. I got to find a window to get something in there. And that's what the people in the Midwest are finding too, is they have different windows than we have, but they have windows they got to hit. And so some years it works and some years it doesn't. They have more rotations. We're a lot of what we do is in permanent crop. So it's going to be the same crop every year, pretty much on the same calendar. So it's fitting other things to it. And then if you were listing the reasons to plant a cover crop, nationally, soil erosion control is the #1 answer. And the point on that one is it takes about a century in real good climate to build an inch of topsoil. and you can wash that away in a couple hours in a heavy
Right.
rainstorm.
Right.
Keeping the soil covered is going to keep it in place. We spent all that time improving it. Let's keep it on the ranch.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Tom. It's been so great to have you on our show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Tom.
Cut.